I am going to walk through today some issues about things disappearing. And if you think about it, now I am a philosopher, and a lot of people don't think that that's very practical, but it has a lot of practical application. But I'm one of those kinds of people that I can give you five arguments for God's existence, but I can't find my keys. And so things disappear in my life. And you can imagine in your own personal life, things can disappear. And just think about it for a moment. What can disappear? Well, like I just said, your keys can go missing. It doesn't mean they don't exist, but they're missing. They've disappeared. Where did I put them? Uh, the president of Reasons to Believe, Fuzz Rana, his wife, Amy Rana, actually made me out of an old piano. She created piano keys that have hooks on them, and I can put my physical car keys on the piano keys, so I always know where my keys are now. It's a wonderful gift. We use it all the time, but I'm one of those absent-minded professors. But you think about what other things go missing in our life. It could just be a pair of socks when we do wash, or it can be something very, very profound. Something such as a person can go missing. Now, again, it doesn't mean that those things don't exist, that we don't talk about them, but they can disappear from our life. What I want to talk about is, can knowledge disappear? And specifically, I'm going to address, can moral knowledge disappear? And then point to what can we do about it? So just to coach yourself psychologically, imagine yourself going into a doctor's office and then the doctor finally tells you what's wrong. And if he doesn't tell you the remedy, I know you would be a little frustrated. Well, you're going to be a little frustrated with me today because I don't have time to give you both the diagnosis and the remedy. But maybe Zwala will invite me back and we can talk more deeply about the remedy. But we only have so much time, so I'm going to talk about it, the disappearance of morality, especially as it has happened in the West. I think it applies to your context, but you will have to decide in what ways it has or it has not, and you can be the judge. But let's just think about knowledge and know-how and skill and how that can disappear. Not too long ago in France, we had uh, the terrible scene of the Notre Dame Cathedral being burned, and they had to go through a very rigorous process of rebuilding it. But what was interesting in the process was they had to find persons, they had to go around the world and find people who had the knowledge, the know-how on how to craft certain kinds of pieces of wood in the roof, stained glass, all these sorts of skills. And to some degree, that knowledge, that skill had disappeared. It had to be rediscovered, it had to be found in order for the cathedral to be rebuilt. So we find this disappearance in everyday knowledge and in know-how. To continue, at least an example in my life, while I was going through college, my father was a truck driver. And in my house, if you were a man, you had to learn directions. And directions were really important to get around in Southern California, where there's so many streets and places to go. I've been to India, particularly Chennai. It was called Madras back in the 90s, and it was very interesting to navigate in the city. And you need to know how to get through. You need certain to spot certain landmarks, or you need a map. Well, when I was growing up, you had to learn how to use what was called the Thomas Guide, and these were maps, and they were put in squares, and you would open those up, find where you're at. You always had to know that you are here, where you're at, and then it would point you to the next map, the next square to tell you where to go next. And you would write out your directions and figure out where you had to go. And it was a very arduous process, but you kind of mind mapped with your mind, and you had an idea of where you're going, and you would pick out certain features of the landscape, and you would start to remember your pathway. Now, interesting, and some of you may recognize this and do this today with GPS and the technological revolution. It has resulted in a new problem that we have, and researchers, psychologists, psychiatrists have found that the resulting tech revolution has also resulted in the inability for many people to navigate their surroundings, and they suffer from what they call a lack of knowledge about their surroundings. So the use of GPS and navigation has resulted in the disappearance, there's that word again, of spatial memory, of spatial navigation, also of mental mapping. And with that, uh, people lose the know-how, the knowledge of where they're at. They lose the knowledge or the skill. In fact, you could say there's a disappearance of directional knowledge. I had a student in one of my classes. I asked her where she lived, and she was a freshman and new to the school. And she says, I live in La Habra. You don't need to know where that is, but it's about 30, 40 minutes away from the school. And I said, oh, do you visit we have a place called In-N-Out Burger, very famous in Southern California. I said, do you visit the In-N-Out near you around the corner? She says, no, I have no idea. And she says, I just get in my car, I turn on my GPS, and I start to drive. And finally, I end up at work or I end up at school. And she had not learned how to mind map, to know her surroundings or even explore her surroundings. She was completely dependent on her GPS. And one day she was driving into Los Angeles and her apps shut down for some reason, and she was truly lost. She didn't know where she was. She got off the freeway, tried to ask for directions, but she didn't know where she was. She didn't have that "you are here" red, dot on her map. And she panicked. She said she even started to cry. And she realized her phone worked. And so she called her friend, and her friend and her kind of figured out where she was and was able to get her back home. So she literally had a disappearance of where she was, the knowledge of where she was. And this is something that takes place in our current culture. Uh, so we have a disappearance of spatial knowledge, directional knowledge, a mental mapping of where we're at. This is a common phenomena. There are even organizations now, startups that are designing new applications to help us re-require our spatial awareness, our mental mapping of the areas that we're in. I find it myself. I was just in Germany and I relied heavily on GPS, but I tried to mental map where I was and exercise that muscle in my mind. So we all have to deal with it and experience. Now, we may have the experience of the disappearance of mental and spatial knowledge. Is there a disappearance of moral knowledge? So let me give you just a quick map, if I can use that term again, of where we're going. And let me tell you what I'm going to do for our next few minutes here together. What I'd like to give you is my central claim. So I want to make it very clear. I want to just start with some preliminary considerations talking about what I mean by knowledge. And I don't mean to get too philosophical, but I think we need to know what we were referring to here. And also a paradox when I talk about moral knowledge, I want to raise to you. So some preliminary considerations. Then I want to give you several causes for the disappearance. There's several of them. I'll probably only focus on two or three of those, and the rest of those we'll have to leave for another time or for your reading. We'll take some Q&A, and if you want to, I can talk about, depending on time, how do we recover our moral knowledge. So that's the roadmap, that's the big forest, but now we're going to jump down into the trees if you're ready. So take notes, write down questions, and get ready to engage as we walk through this. So this idea of the disappearance of moral knowledge, it's not original with me. A number of other philosophers and authors have addressed this issue in our contemporary culture, but I borrowed the title, I want to be forthright with you, from one of my mentors who passed away about 10 years ago, named Dr. Dallas Willard. Now, this is a technical book. It's meant for professional philosophers. So I'm not giving you the technical side of things, but trying to make it a little bit more practical. But there are several other books that address this issue from different angles, whether it is within the university, like Julie Rubin does, in education, like James Davison Hunter, the philosopher theologian Oliver Donovan in The Disappearance of Ethics, Jay Budziszewski, and he's a professor down in Texas, and the Harvard professor Michael Sandel, and others who address these issues. So there's a treasure trove. We have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to trying to understand this. But some of these are more technical work. I'm trying to bring it down to a more basic level of understanding for myself and just for a broader audience. So here's the main claim. The main claim is this. Now, this is especially for the West. You'll have to decide whether it fits your context well in India or where you are from. But at least in what we call West, in Europe, in the United States, North America, and places, this seems to be, or at least I'm arguing to be the case. There is now no recognized, systematic, and I'm being careful here with the language, body of moral teaching that can be presented as moral knowledge. These are key words that can be presented as moral knowledge by the institutions of authority and power in Western society. More specifically, I'm referring to universities, also churches. I was a pastor for 20 years and other religious institutions or nonprofits. This is particularly bad when it comes to law and government. And you might already feel the tension in that we talk about morality and law and these kinds of things all the time. And I would agree with you. We talk about them, but we no longer have a systematic body of knowledge that each of these institutions and persons in those institutions can access and appeal to as an authority and a body of knowledge. And I'll unpack this more as we get to it. So, what do I mean by a systematic body of moral knowledge? Well, just briefly, what I mean by that is, for instance, and you can look at this from Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount. He addresses this, the classic philosophers do, such as Aristotle, Epictetus, and others. But we have this notion of, well, who is well off? Who is happy or blessed? Or to put it another way, what is the good life? Now, in my context, when you say, hey, I'm living the good life, people relativize that. And that's very, very particular to an individual and just what their tastes are. But I'm referring here to an objective sense of what is the good life? What is a blessed life? What does it mean to live a happy life? And there's no broad, systematic answer to that anymore in our institutions, in our government, our law. There used to be actually, but there is no longer. And so we have to ask the question also because we can't live without answering this question, even if it's just a hidden presupposition we have. Who or what is a good person? Can we point to someone we think is, oh, that's a really good person? It could be my dad or my mom or a friend. Or what about a person in society, a pastor or a government leader? Can we point to a good person? And can we detail the properties, the characteristics of what makes a good person? What are those properties? Is selflessness, humility? What are those things? And there's incredible disagreement over this today. Also, how does one, I think this is probably the key question. How does one become a good person? How do we make good people? If I asked you, or I said to you, my New Year's resolution was I have a vision of being a fit and healthy person. That's my vision of the good life. And I point to a few people who I think are fit, have muscles, and are in shape and can walk and run well. Um, but I need to know what it takes for me to become a good, healthy person. I need some mechanisms, some means. So I might buy a gym membership or something along those lines, but I need to know how to use those machines and the weights and the exercises in order to fulfill that vision. And so this is a very, very key part, something that has, I would argue, disappeared in our society. How do we as a culture make good persons? How do we make good people? And this is actually very, very difficult for people to answer. I've taught classes on this for 20 years, and you should watch students squirm when I ask this question, or just simply try to tell a parent how to parent their children. They usually, at least in the US, uh, people will say, well, who are you to say how I should raise my kids? It's a very individual, personal, relative decision for people. But it doesn't always result in good people. Unfortunately, we're seeing the issues of that. So when I say there's no systematic body of moral knowledge, these are the things that I'm pointing to. Very, very practical, very, very important questions that we need answers to. And we live out our answers whether we like it or not. These aren't pure philosophical, completely abstract questions and answers that we are dealing with. They're very, very practical. Okay, so this is sort of the big picture, my claim. There's been a disappearance on what is the good life, what is a good person, and how do we make good people. Now, before I start to build on this, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page. We come from different places, upbringings, different levels of training, so I want to make sure we're on the same page. So let me just go through two what I would call preliminary considerations. Number one, I want to make sure we're on the same page is what we mean by knowledge. Now, this is a philosophical term that we need understanding of. And I'm not going to try to get too deeply philosophical. You can ask deeper questions if you'd like, but just the basic understanding. What do we mean by knowledge? And also, I want to address a paradoxical tension about this topic that you're going to feel, and I want to acknowledge it psychologically. So let me briefly walk through these two preliminary considerations, then we'll get to some causes of that disappearance of knowledge. So when we ask the question, what is knowledge? We're jumping into a field of philosophy known as epistemology. And all that really means is how do we know things? What are the basis of knowing things? If I have philosophy books in the trunk of my car, well, how do I know that? Well, I know that based off of my memory. I could know it from my wife, who gives me a testimony that she saw them there, or I can go physically open the trunk, look, and empirically with my eyes or with my hands see that there and feel that there are books in my trunk. That's all we mean by epistemology. Now, knowledge is a very interesting word. We use it all the time. It's as common as love, but we need to be able to describe it. And for our purposes today, I'm going to describe knowledge as this. Knowledge is our ability, our capacity. It's a human capacity to represent things as they are on an appropriate basis of thought and experience. Now, that's worded very carefully and a little bit generally to cover a lot of things, but knowledge is our ability, our capacity to represent things. So if I know there are books in the trunk of my car, I can represent that knowledge by describing the books to you. And I would tell you, I know that because I've seen them there. I left them there with my memory. Or maybe I would show you a picture of the books. right? Now, my memory could be mistaken, the picture could be falsified. Sure, there's problems with our knowledge, but for the most case, this is just how we get along in life with knowledge. And it's not that different with moral knowledge. Moral knowledge is our ability to represent moral reality as it is on an appropriate basis of thought and experience. So let's just take a simple claim like it is raining outside, or it is currently raining outside my home here in Southern California. Now, for for me to know that and not just believe it, there are certain things that must take place. So I am the subject and I have a proposition. It is raining outside. And of course, I if I know that it's raining outside, I would know that if and only if, number one, I, George, as the subject, believes that it's raining outside. So if I know something, I believe it. So belief is different than knowledge. Knowledge is something deeper than belief. I can claim to believe a lot of things, but it doesn't follow from that that I know it. So, but if I do know it's raining outside, I must believe it. That's a necessary part. Also, I should have some evidence for my belief that it's raining outside. I hear the pitter patter of raindrops. I know it's not my wife watering outside. I looked at the forecast and it was supposed to rain. Or maybe I even open the curtains and I see the water coming down outside. Now, is it possible I'm wrong? Yes, sure. There could be other circumstances where I'm mistaken, but what I gave you was a series of evidences that would justify me believing that it's raining outside. One final important note here is that for me to know it's raining outside, I have to believe it. I should have the appropriate evidence, but it must be true. In other words, my belief should link up or correspond to the way the world actually is. That is, it's raining outside. So notice here something very interesting. I can believe something, even have evidence for it, but if it's not true, I wouldn't know it. That truth piece is very necessary in order that I know something. So to know something means I believe it, it's true, and I'm justified. I have evidence for it. Now, philosophers will go very, very deeply into discussing this and these different aspects of it. But I'm just giving you a cursory understanding of what we basically and practically think about when we know something. And I recognize as a philosopher and just as a human being who experiences the world, that knowledge is not a simple matter. We can mean very different things when it comes to knowing something. What I just gave you there is what's called propositional knowledge, having a statement and knowing that that statement is true. There's other ways to know, and I'm not trying to confuse you here, but just give you a robust set of tools in your toolbox for you to be aware of. You don't need to memorize this right now, but I want to make you aware of it. Philosophers talk about knowledge as personal acquaintance. I can be aware of something directly, like walking into a dark room and I'm aware that something's in front of me, but I don't know it's a chair or it's a bed or it's another person, but I know something's there. That could be knowledge as personal acquaintance, even though I can't propositionally describe it. Or I could have knowledge as a mastery of data or know-how. As Walla said earlier, I play the drums. I can know how to play the drums, even if I couldn't teach you how or detail all the propositions or write out the music for playing the drums. I just know how to do it. Some people can work on cars, fix plumbing, have lots of skills, we call it, and that's sort of know-how. They know how to do something. That's another type of knowledge. Or, as I was just talking about, knowledge as truth claims or propositional knowledge. If I say it is raining outside, well, I believe it, I have reasons for it, evidence, and it's true that it's raining outside. So, obviously, this can get very complicated, and we have to detail what we mean by it. but I'm going to apply this to the issue of knowledge. Whereas we actually, the way I would talk about it is we have knowledge by acquaintance. I think we actually know some things are right and wrong, even if we can't know the basis on how we know those things. Um, we have to get along in the world, so we have some moral knowledge to get through life. Um, but when we claim to know that something is true, morally speaking, that claim is deeply challenged in our institutions. And I'm going to try to show that to you. So, the possession, now read this carefully here with me. The possession of knowledge is what gives a person authority and power to act in another person's life. This is really important. The possession of knowledge is what gives a person authority and power to act in another person's life. We give people a place in our life to do things for us and to us if we think they have the appropriate knowledge. And so we hand over authority and power to them. Let me give you some illustrations. Let's say you're getting on a plane. I just did this recently. I was doing some speaking tours on the East Coast of the United States, and people would say to me, "Hey, have a safe flight." And and I would say, "Well, that's up to the pilot. I don't have the ability to guarantee a safe flight. I mean, obviously, I don't do anything stupid, but that's up to the skill, the knowledge of the pilot or the pilots, right? So I hand over power and authority to the pilot of the plane because I think he has knowledge by personal acquaintance. He has know-how, skill, experience he's developed, and he has propositional knowledge about the plane and how it works, how it functions, how it can carry X amount of people and the weight and all these sorts of things. Now, some of us may remember a story that happened here in the United States by his name is Chelsea Burnett Sullenberger, nicknamed Sully. He is best known for his heroic actions as the captain of the U.S. Airways Flight 1549 back in January 15th, 2009. This was what was called the Miracle of the Hudson. And after a flock of geese disabled both of the plane's engines shortly after takeoff from LaGuardia Airport in New York, Captain Sullenberger skillfully, knowledgeably executed an emergency water landing on the Hudson River in New York City. Now, what's amazing is he saved every life on the plane due to his quick thinking, his knowledge, and expertise. In all, 155 passengers and crew aboard survived. Was quite a feat. He was at first challenged whether or not he did the right thing. It's amazing. You can watch the movie about it, but he was deemed innocent and a hero after the investigation. But he had knowledge in order to save those people and fly the plane. Think about other basic areas of life. You may go to a dentist, and the dentist works on our teeth, and we give people a certain opportunity and authority to perform activities in our lives based on their knowledge and expertise. And, would you allow your teeth to be worked on by a dentist who only said something like, well, I believe it's a cavity, or I believe I know how to operate a drill? No, I wouldn't give that dentist any sort of authority. If he said, I think I can, I believe I can, no, 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 no. I want you to have knowledge. I want you to have expertise, skill, and experience, which includes knowledge to be able to work on my teeth. So this is just something practical we do every day without thinking about knowledge in and of itself. If my plumber came over and wanted to and said open wide, I want to work on your teeth, I wouldn't allow him because he doesn't have the knowledge and expertise in most cases to do such a thing, but I would let him work on my sink. And the same goes true if my dentist came over and she wanted to work on my sink. I mean, I guess she could be an expert plumber too, but does she have the requisite knowledge or skill to do that? So I think you get the point that the possession of knowledge is what gives a person authority and power to act in our lives, right? Now, let me just give you a biblical basis for this. You might be surprised how often the term knowledge is used in the Bible. Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for the lack of what? Fill in the blank. Worship. No, that's not what Hosea says. My people are destroyed for a lack of funding. No, that's not what Hosea says. But the prophet goes on to say, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, moral knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. God says, I reject you from being a priest to me. And since you have forgotten the law of your God, I will also forget your children. So there's consequences to rejecting knowledge here. And I could detail many other scripture verses. Take something out of Isaiah. The way of peace they do not know. There is no justice in their paths. They have turned them into crooked roads. No one walks along them will know peace. So here we have moral knowledge and spiritual knowledge here. And Isaiah goes on to describe the darkness that they will walk in for their lack of even the disappearance of moral knowledge. So knowledge can disappear. Here we're talking about moral knowledge, spiritual knowledge, because it's rejected. It could be suppressed, ignored, obscured, or even forgotten. In our time, I'm just reminded of the moral reformer. You've had moral reformers in India and in various places, but Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Talked about knowledge that was disappearing back in the 60s here. He used a particular parable from Luke. It's not important to us right now, but he says it's midnight in our world, he mentioned. And this was due to the civil rights movement. And he said, and the darkness is so deep that we can hardly see which way to turn. It is also midnight within the moral order. At midnight, colors lose their distinctiveness. They disappear and become a sullen shade of gray. Moral principles have lost their distinctiveness. For modern man, absolute right and wrong are a matter of, notice what he says, of what the majority is doing. It's not a matter of knowledge. It's a matter of what the majority is doing. Right and wrong are relative to likes and dislikes. They're reduced. They're taken away from knowledge to just what I like or dislike and become part of the customs of a particular community. And he makes a final comment saying, we have unconsciously applied Einstein's theory of relativity, which properly described the physical universe, to the moral and ethical realm. And there he's pointing to some form of relativism. So this idea of knowledge, it can be rejected, lost, it can disappear, especially moral knowledge and spiritual knowledge. And this is recognized not only biblically, but I think generally in the culture and to moral reformers like Martin Luther King Jr. Now, you might feel a tension when thinking about your culture or our culture here over in the US, North America. Um, there's a bit of a paradox, a tension that we live under. Why? Because in one sense, how can we say moral knowledge has disappeared when there is just so much moral talk about morals legislation in society and morality? I mean, the amount of political and moral talk that I have to engage with on a daily basis, with comments about our president, or it's just a plethora of statements. So how can one say that moral knowledge has disappeared when moral talk is ubiquitous? It's everywhere. And I would give you various examples. I won't go deeply into this, but just in my context, our shows, we have television shows that talk about the good place, heaven, and how to be a moral person. This is a comedy show that is here. People put placards and posters on their lawns that use words like this. Love is love. No human is illegal. Notice on the sign it says, "In this house we believe." I want to put out a sign that says, "In this house we know." But notice even on the sign they use the word believe, and it's not knowledge. We'll say more about that later. People wear T-shirts about how peace is power, or there's going to be no peace until justice is done. So we have conflicting moral claims going on. So moral knowledge disappears, and people retreat to only believing moral claims, or we have conflicting moral claims. So we don't actually know things. I saw a car in California that said this. It was pro-choice America dealing with the abortion issue. Yet on the right side of the car, they had a bumper sticker that said boycott veal, stop factory farming. Well, on the left side, they're for pro-choice. On the right side, they're not pro-choice. So which is it? I actually waited outside the car to see if the person would come so I could talk to them. But that never happened. um, Even if I order my food, we have a Mexican food place called Chipotle. They'll give you a report after you order your food, and it talks about your food print, telling you whether you're being a good person towards the planet. So this is that moral talk. It's just ubiquitous everywhere. And here's what I experience in my classes. Have you ever wondered why students or friends simultaneously deny moral facts yet accept the universal wrongness of bullying, sexual assault, or greed? So people really they talk about morality. They maybe have beliefs about morality, even can legislate it, but they will back off on claiming there's knowledge when it comes to morality. So let me finish off by just talking about some of the causes of this disappearance. Hopefully, some of this will resonate with you. Now, I could go through about 7 or more different causes, but I'm just going to focus on 2 or 3 here for our purposes. One of the main reasons for the disappearance of moral knowledge has been the discrediting of religion, specifically Christianity and Judaism, as a source and the basis of knowledge about reality, especially moral reality. This is very, very prevalent, and there's quite a history about this. Also, there's a disappearance of what we would call the human self or soul from the acceptable domain of human knowledge. In most scientific circles, the soul or self has been expunged, has been done away with. Also, there's been a shift to talking about moral knowledge or moral facts and merely putting them in the category of moral opinions or feelings or desires. And I could go on further talking about how people see variations between cultures or individuals, and they think that justifies the relativity of morality when that logically does not follow. Also, some people see standards of morality as power plays. They're just used to have power over different people. We've seen that a lot recently in the last 5 years here in the US. Some people see that if you claim to know morality, that's harmful because you're being dogmatic, or they're even resentful or fearful of knowledge itself. They are fearful that you're not going to be tolerant, that you are going to legislate your morality on someone else. And that has some profound and deep consequences. Let me just give you a couple of illustrations as we close up here about these causes. Let's take the discrediting of religion as one of the causes for the disappearance of morality. In an article on entitled Nietzsche Before the Breakdown, Nietzsche, of course, was a philosopher in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And John Gray says this. He said, Nietzsche believed that without a spiritual realm in which goodness and truth are one and the same, as Plato affirmed and as Christianity did in the divine Logos in the person of Christ, values are ultimately expressions of human will. They are not a body of knowledge to be applied to society. And he goes further in the article to unpack this, but this is a profound statement of what has happened, and we're seeing the results of it in my culture here in North America. This is a philosopher, Michael Roos. He in one hand, acknowledges morality He says the man who says that it's morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 plus 2 equals 5. Notice he equates it there to mathematics. That's an interesting analogy. But then he goes on to say in an article in The Guardian, he says, look, God is dead, so why should I be good? The answer is that there are no grounds whatsoever for being good. He says morality is flim flam. It's just a matter of emotions and desires and likes and dislikes. So here you have a prominent philosopher. You have an early modern thinker. Now, let me just give you an example from this is the president of Harvard in the 1980s. He said, look, religious institutions no longer seem as able as they once were to impart basic values to the young. In these circumstances, universities need to think hard about what they can do in the face of what many perceive as a widespread of decline in ethical standards. Now, this is back in the 80s. I was just starting to go to college in this time, and he was talking this way. He goes on to say that today's courses in applied ethics, they didn't even teach them much in the 90s and 2000s. Um, they don't convey, notice his words, they don't convey a set of moral truths, but rather they try to help the students think carefully about complex moral issues. In other words, there's no truth, there's no knowledge to be had. We just help you think critically about it. That's a really interesting statement. 10 years after that, John Mearsheimer at the University of Chicago, another top school in the United States, he gave a talk to the educators, the professors at the school, and he said, look, our aims are to develop critical thinking, broaden intellectual horizons, enhance self-awareness, clarify what your values are. But look what he says. In his speech, he says, look, we are not here to provide truth. We're not here to teach morality. Now, these are forthright acknowledgments about one of the main institutions in the United States or North America about how their goal is not to promote morality. They just want you to think about problems, to critically think about problems. And this is a huge problem. Uh, the USC School of Philosophy director Scott Soames put it this way. He said, since no single moral perspective dominates all others in society, especially the universe, notice what he says, intimidation, coercion, and condescension fill the gap left by the absence of moral reasoning. And we could put there also moral knowledge. And this is definitely the case in our institutions. I'm a professor at a university, and I can't tell you how many times, as both a professor and a pastor, I coached and I tried to train students going into college or coach families. Be really careful sending your kids to college because they will not be taught how to be moral persons. So, number one is a big cause. Number two, there has been, and this is a bit of a story, but a disappearance of the human self or soul from acceptable domains of human knowledge. Look, if you don't have a soul or a spirit or a self that has a nature to be trained to have moral progress, to be morally transformed, then what are you? Well, you are reduced to a brain. And this is how people generally think of human persons. And I can give example after example. Let me just give you a couple. Back in 1999, there were two college-age kids who terribly, it was an evil situation, but they went to Columbine High School and shot up a number of classmates. Now, Time magazine said, "Who are these monsters next door? Notice what made them do it?" And if you go in and read the article, they try to describe their brains as the reasons to why they did things. Like they had no control over it. It was their brain. They were determined to do it, or their environment made them do it. No moral accountability, no moral knowledge. This was true a few years later in Las Vegas when there was a shooter. And in order to explain it, they didn't go to categories within morality. What a main news source, Newsweek, said, will we learn anything from the brain of the Las Vegas shooter, Stephen Paddock? Of course, what they found was his brain was functioning actually just fine. So they couldn't tell anything from, if you will, science in this case. Rather, it was it was an evil problem. There was a disappearance of moral knowledge in these cases. There was a book by James Davison Hunter and philosopher Paul Netoliski who goes into the story about how science has tried to provide foundations for the good, but they go in and show that this has resulted in a tragic failure and has led many scientists to say there is no such thing as morality. They are what's called moral nihilists. One last one you should be aware of: the relegation of moral facts to moral opinions. There has been a huge shift, and not many people are aware of this, at least that I talk to, but there are no such things as moral facts anymore, but moral opinions. That is, things based on feelings, desire, and will. Now, I would make the claim that even children early on have the capacity to know morality. Things are not fair. In fact, children even become obsessed with fairness, and you can read psychological articles about it. However, um, you could read Justin McBriar's article in the New York Times on why our children don't think there are moral facts anymore. And he goes into a story of how he found out that his young child was being taught by the public school teachers that there are no such things as morality or moral facts. It's an interesting story. But I've discovered this myself in 20 years of teaching this. I used to do a game. You could find it online. They've taken it down now, but it was a game using some cartoon characters. His name was Binky, and he would talk about facts and opinions. And he would try to train you. And this was an online game. Do you know the difference between a fact and opinion? And he would say things like, Pal has 4 legs. Is that a fact or an opinion? And the game would say, notice it says, I can show somebody else why this is true. No matter who says it, it's true. Pal has 4 legs because you can just see it. So there's a empirical implication here. But if you say Pal is the best pet, I could imagine, what if he said Pal is a good pet? What would he say? He says, well, that's just a matter of opinion. It's just my opinion that he's a good pet. Okay. Right. It's because I can't show you that Pal is the best pet. Now, take this picture. This person is standing. Is that a fact or an opinion? And everyone in the class will say, oh, yeah, it's a fact. He is standing, right? Now, if I put this picture up, he is a boy. Is that a fact or an opinion? No one in the class will answer. In fact, I get giggles, I get gasps. Um, no one will say anything because it's not a matter of moral knowledge. It's not a matter of fact. It's a matter of opinion these days. In fact, if you go into the curriculum, this is the common core standards for teaching in the United States. What they will do in the Common Core is they teach elementary, middle school, and high school kids to sort facts from opinions. And I can't get into detail now, but they give you these definitions about facts and opinions, and the definitions are mistaken, and the teachers don't know it. But what happens is if you accept their definitions, these are the statements they give you, like all men and women are created equal. Cheating or copying on homework assignments is wrong. And they'll take these 7 statements or more, and what they'll show you is that all of these statements are opinions, and you cannot know them to be facts. And what this results in with teachers and the students is that students are taught that all value, moral, and aesthetic claims, good, bad, right, and wrong, ugly, beautiful are all opinion, and there's no factual claims. In other words, there's no knowledge when it comes to morality, aesthetics, or value. And both students and teachers that I instruct are shocked about this. Skip this for now. So we have these various causes of moral disappearance, and I could go more in deeply to it. And what I want to conclude with is what James Davison Hundred said. He said this. He said, "Look, as it is currently institutionalized, moral education does just the opposite of what it intends. In its present forms, it undermines the capacity to form the convictions upon which character and virtue must be based if it is to exist at all." He says, look, we say we want character in our day, and this is so true. I hear people talk about it all the time, but we really don't know what we are asking for. To have a renewal of character is to have a renewal of creedal order. That hinges back to Judaism and Christianity. That constrains, limits, binds, obligates, and compels us to do certain things. It's moral knowledge. But for us, the price is too high to pay. We want character, but without unyielding conviction. We want strong morality, but without emotional burden or guilt or shame. We want virtue, but without particular moral justifications that invariably offend others. You see, what we want good without having to name evil. We want decency without authority to insist upon it. We want more community without any limitations on our own personal freedom. And he concludes with this parting shot. In short, we want what we cannot possibly have on the terms that we want it. Or to put it as T.S. Eliot, the famous writer, once said, we're looking for a moral system so perfect that we don't have to be good. There is a literal disappearance of moral knowledge.